My hand had been slowly healing. Not being able to flex my fingers the first few days was a little annoying. I didn't want to strain myself chasing down supernatural monsters until the tainted magic faded. Instead of monster hunting, I took some time to collect cans and bottles off the street in my neighborhood. I got a few judgmental glances, but it got me out of the house and enough money to buy a loaf of bread and a carton of eggs. Plus, some trash got recycled. A win for everyone. Finally, a new request came in that sounded simple enough. I was surprised to find out August had passed on it. He said he didn't want anyone to see him hanging around in bars, and assuming he was a bad parent who stayed out all night. There had been 3 disappearances in the past 2 weeks. All were male, and each had last been seen at a certain bar. There were no records of them getting a lift home. The one who drove to the bar left behind his car. So far, he had not appeared again to claim it. Some cameras pointed to the front door, but none of the men were seen leaving. However, the front door wasn't the only exit. There was a chance they had left some other way. Something like this normally doesn't end up on the corporation's radar. But a 4th man was found inside the bar's washroom, with his head missing. It didn't seem possible for a human to remove the head, clean up, and leave without being seen in such a short span of time. That was when something supernatural had to be considered. The job was simple: to act as bait to lure out anything that might be targeting men in the area. The corporation would cover the bar tabs for food and non-alcoholic drinks. I heard there were at least 3 others who took the job, ready to sit around in different bars in the area looking for signs of a predator. It seemed easy enough. I didn't even need to fight the monster if I found it. Passing along info to stronger agents was good enough. I didn't want to wear my better clothing, which I was eventually able to remove the security tags from. Thankfully, my local thrift shop had a sale on, and I spent some of my recycling money there. Sure, the clothing was a little worn, and I could not get the thrift shop smell out of them, but what supernatural monster would ever notice that? I hope this job lasted for a few days of free meals. The first night was uneventful. I talked to some of the regulars and bought them some food on my company's dime. No one had noticed anything strange lately. The bar wasn't overly busy, but I assumed that would change the next night. It was near a college, so on Friday and Saturday nights it was normally packed, regardless of the odd recent death in a nearby bar. From what I could tell, this place was for normal humans to make bad choices. I wanted to wait through the weekend just to be certain, though. When the bar closed on that first night, I ordered a few extra meals to take home, and to give out to some of the homeless men I saw hanging around outside when I arrived earlier that night. Most of the time, the homeless were the ones to see the first signs of supernatural creatures. Due to their situation, and what led them to their current lifestyle, most people wouldn't believe them, even if they went to the police with important information. Most of the time, they never spoke up, because they feared authority figures. 2 gratefully accepted the food, while 1 wasn't pleased I didn't offer him money. I asked them if they had seen anything strange lately. I was told that a few minutes before closing, they had seen a man in a suit lurking around the alleyways. It seemed odd to them. I thanked them, promising another meal tomorrow night if I was able. I tracked down the man they'd mentioned. Once I saw him poking around in the trash, I confirmed what I'd assumed. "Hey, I'm working on the same case as you. Find anything useful tonight?" I said, causing the man to jump at someone suddenly talking to him. "Oh, no. Nothing, sorry. Are you an agent as well?" he asked as he walked over toward me, slipping on some trash in the alleyway. He looked on the younger side. I never would have assumed he was an agent fighting monsters at first glance. He had a smaller frame with a pretty face, one that reminded me of a Japanese ball-jointed doll. Honestly, his pale, doll-like skin was almost creepy. "No, just a contract worker. I'm Richmond." I offered my hand as I introduced myself. "I'm Agent Ito. Since we'll be working on this together, let's exchange phone numbers." I pulled out my phone to get his number. He was friendly, with a calming voice. An agent like this wouldn't last long in his line of work. He must be new. After exchanging numbers, he told me he was going to be at a bar 2 blocks away the next night. If I needed any help, I should text him. It was a nice feeling to know I had backup. I let him go on his way with a promise to take him up on the offer for help. I slept in the next day. Since I didn't need to go out until later that night, I accepted a request from August to watch Lucas for a few hours. His washing machine was better than my own, so I babysat and did some chores. Things were going too well. That stressed me out. Call me paranoid, but I had a feeling a rough night was ahead of me. I was one of the first to enter the bar that night after babysitting. For hours, nothing interesting happened. It got louder as more students arrived. I found a spot by the bar with a good view of the rest of the room. Every once in a while, I looked off into the crowd looking for signs of magic. The strain on my eyes hurt like hell, and I ended up giving myself a migraine. Being able to see magic, and sometimes past a human mask monsters wore, didn't help me get jobs done as often as someone might think. I couldn't control the sight very well in such a large crowd. Most of the stronger creatures knew how to hide their powers, even from my eyes. There was also a surprisingly large amount of harmless half-breeds. Some people weren't even aware that they had something other than human in them. So, someone with more magic than normal wasn't a reason to be overly worried. Halfway through the night, it was starting to look like a bust. A person sat next to me, making it clear the night was going to get interesting. A set of blue eyes landed on mine. I found myself staring at one of the most beautiful women I'd ever seen. Her long brown hair fell over her shoulders in waves. Her white turtleneck sweater was plain, but it didn't need to be anything fancy. Her perfect features drew your attention away from what she was wearing. It took me a second to realize she had asked me to buy her a drink. I waved over the bartender and paid for one with my own money. The corporation was only covering soda and juice. She thanked me with a smile that made me look away. When I looked back, I was once again caught by her beauty. "What's your name, handsome?" "I'm Cameron," she asked when her drink arrived. "Richmond," I replied. My mouth felt dry just being around her. She gave another blinding smile that caused me to wonder if she was dangerous or not. You didn't need special eyesight to see she wasn't human. She was so clearly a hunter on the prowl. "What's a guy like you doing in a college bar like this?" she pressed in a somewhat teasing tone. My job had worn down my features. I looked at least 10 years older than I really was. A bar like this was a great spot for a creature to pick up easy targets. A chill went down my spine as I realized I might have come across the reason why men had started to go missing. "I'll tell you if you can keep a secret," I said as I lowered my voice. She leaned in, face bright and ready. "I'm keeping an eye on the bar for a good reason," I started. "Is it because of the headless man in the bathroom a while ago?" she asked, face flushed with excitement. I focused on her reaction. Cameron looked happy to be talking with someone she thought was a cop, instead of fearful she would get caught. Was she a man-eating monster, or just a true crime junkie? Something like that. "What brings you to a bar like this? You don't seem to be a part of this crowd," I pointed out. She looked over the room, her eyes staying on certain younger guys for a few seconds. She wasn't hiding her hunger very well. I hoped she hadn't realized I knew of supernatural creatures, and assumed I was into local gruesome events like herself. "Guys here are easy. I smile at them and I can take them home. Speaking of which, do you want to stay with me tonight?" she offered, as she rested her chin in her hands. My mouth got dry again. I took a long sip of my drink, hoping she would forget the offer in the next few seconds. She patiently waited for my answer. It was tempting. Very tempting. I almost said yes before I let my real brain think for a moment. "I'm not really your type. I'm honestly pretty depressing when you get to know me, I half joked, hoping that scared her off. Oh, I love pathetic men. The sadder the better, she countered. I'm working, I said, with a slight nervous shake in my voice. Not asking for a quick hookup in the bathroom. I can wait until the end of the night. She reached out to take my hand. My body felt hot from the touch in an unnatural way. If I gave in, I risked getting my head torn off. My brain was muddled by her perfume, and the very little self-preservation I had left. You're very pretty, I blurted out. I felt my face turn red. I meant to say she was out of my league, and I was not going home with her. I know, she said cheerfully. I stared at her, admiring her confidence. For some reason, we both started laughing. Once we calmed down, I was able to think through a few facts. The creature who had killed 4 men went after older targets. Cameron wasn't stressed out by my admission that I was working on the case. I doubted she was the monster going around ripping heads off. She wasn't human, that much was clear. But I think she was a creature that drained something from their human victims but kept them alive. I didn't see any pointed teeth when she smiled, so I doubted she was a vampire. They were real, but full-blooded ones were very rare nowadays. I can help you with this job of yours. I like helping. If I'm useful, a certain corporation gives me nice perks, Cameron said, and pulled back a little. So that was why she'd approached me. She thought I was either an agent or was connected with them. She knew a supernatural creature was lurking around aside from herself. But she also could have been lying, or acting in a way that made me not suspect her of the murders. I had nothing besides my feeling to decide whether I trusted her or not. A reason suggesting she wasn't the monster I was after soon came when my phone pinged. I looked at the screen to see I had gotten a text. Ito sent me a single letter. H. My stomach dropped. I quickly stood up, startling Cameron. I gathered my coat and made sure my bill had been paid for. Where are you going? Cameron asked, sounding a little concerned. Somewhere dangerous. I'll see you later. I might still have a chance of taking her up on her offer someday. Right now, though, I needed to go help a baby-faced agent. The bar he had been at was only 2 blocks away. I started running the moment I was outside. My legs hurt from the effort. I hadn't done much in my 2 years off, and my older injuries didn't help. My legs were screaming in pain by the time I nearly reached the other bar. I pushed the discomfort to the back of my mind when I spotted a figure stumbling out of an alleyway. I got to him just in time to catch the agent before he collapsed on the street. What happened? I asked, out of breath. I started looking around for any signs of a monster. Slowly, Ito got back to his feet, and I let myself take a second to see how badly he had been hurt. I don't know how I didn't notice his left arm was missing when I ran over. His suit jacket sleeve had been neatly cut off, but I didn't see any blood. A long, deep cut ran along his cheek that also lacked any blood. It was as if someone had cut into porcelain. The injury was clean, with small cracks near the edges. I'm sorry, I don't know where it went, he shamefully admitted. It's okay, let's call for backup and get you out of here. One of the best ways to stay alive while fighting monsters is to know when to leave. Ito wasn't human, and he had been hurt this badly. I wouldn't stand a chance against whatever took his arm. I only had a knife and a handful of charms on me. I still couldn't afford a gun with effective bullets. Ito bit his lip, hating the fact I was right, and that we needed to go. A sound came from the alleyway he had just come from. It was too dark to see what caused the noise. The agent got in front of me, just in time to block a sudden attack. A long hand made up of twisted flesh came from the darkness. It hit his shoulder hard, making a cracking sound. I swiftly brought out my knife to slash at the deformed arm, drawing blood and causing it to dart back. Run, Ito pleaded. I refused to leave him behind. I grabbed a hold of his good arm, ready to drag him when the monster came into view. It looked like a normal person. My blood ran cold with fear when I realized the face belonged to the man who was currently missing his head. I watched in horror as the flesh under the tattered shirt began to move. Within seconds, the body transformed into a squirming, moving pile of flesh. So many bodies constantly moved around into each other, rotating between gruesome forms. Countless arms sprouted from its sides, each with jagged nails ready to kill us. I grabbed a piece of paper out of my pocket, ready to attack. My body froze again when I heard another awful sound. A woman's scream took my attention away from the monster, long enough to see that Cameron had followed me. My heart sank knowing the creature now had all of its eyes focused on her. It wanted the best meal, and she clearly had more magic than us. I moved in time to slap a charm on one of the creature's arms. I tried to get to Cameron, but I was too late. A blast went off, knocking me from my feet. Charms are paper with spells written on them. The spells could do almost anything, if you put enough magic power inside them. The most popular ones are charms that explode 3 seconds after it's stuck to something. They're basically magic hand grenades. The more powerful ones are more expensive. My basic charm knocked back the monster, but it also knocked back the rest of us. I lifted my head, my ears ringing from the blast. I was on my stomach, legs aching. I saw Cameron on her side, too far away to reach. Her long hair covered her face. I smelled the magic in the air, and thought I heard the monster screaming. My breath caught as my heart started to beat fast. It felt like my body was sinking into the ground, into a terrible day that happened 2 years ago. I could no longer see the present. I only saw my old partner bleeding out on the ground. Her body was torn up from an attack I failed to protect her from. I knew this had already happened, and yet I couldn't get myself to move. I needed to snap out of it, or else another person would die because of my inaction. But it hurt. The thought of her hurt so much. At that moment, I was there. Half dead, legs missing, and too weak to change anything. I shut my eyes tight, trying to get my breathing back under control. No matter what I did, my thoughts always went back to the worst day of my life. Back to her. Suddenly, I thought of the first time I met August. His pamphlets had WWJD printed on them. My old partner's name started with a J. I often would mentally say WWJD when in trouble. I hadn't remembered that for 2 years. What would she do in this situation? Simple. She would get back up. I had gone into debt for these new legs. I needed to use them. My eyes shot open, the fear still sitting in my chest. And yet, I stood up. I took a mental note of the situation. I had a knife and 1 charm left. This creature was stunned, but it would recover too fast for us to get away. Cameron was dazed by the blast. Whatever creature she was, I doubted she could handle the monster in front of us. Ida was missing an arm, and would die if he fought. So far, it seemed as if we would all die no matter what. Backup would not arrive in time. I gripped the knife as I turned my attention back to the creature. It started to stand up, ready to kill us. It had an ever-changing number of hands sprouting from its back. A plate of what looked like bone covered the chest, with the flesh forever moving underneath. Faces appeared along the exposed skin for a few seconds, then disappeared back into the twisting shapes. It had a head made up of 2 fused faces, the mouth reaching from ear to ear, filled with teeth. I decided to take a risk. I took the other charm and ran forward. The hand started toward Cameron, but stopped when I got in front of the monster. Those arms turned in my direction. I didn't give them time to grab hold. It opened its mouth again to let out an ear-piercing scream. With the charm in my left hand, I shoved it deep into the monster's mouth. The teeth came down on reflex, tearing up my forearm. Then the jaw opened again to spit my hand back out. I had seconds to act. I requested some small edits to my second charm. The first request was to make it taste as awful as possible, so it would spit out my hand when I shoved the charm in the mouth of the creature. The second was to make it almost impossible to remove after it was stuck on. The taste was so bad, the creature put its hands into its mouth, trying to remove the piece of paper. It flailed, screaming. It backed up into the alleyway, giving me long enough to reach Ito and Cameron. Cameron had stood up and started to move. I took hold of them and forced us against the wall of the nearest building. I used my body as a shield as I pressed them close together. The explosion of magic was larger than the first charm. Blood and pieces of flesh rained down from the alleyway. The monster had tried to get away, and, luckily enough, the buildings took most of the damage from the blast. To my shock, we lived. I carefully lifted my head to see if the coast was clear. Two very pretty faces looked up at me. I hadn't noticed I wrapped an arm around their waists. We were crushed in a tight hug. I quickly backed away from when I realized what I had done. I started to sputter out an excuse. Cameron cut me off by wrapping her arms tightly around my neck. I felt my face getting hot, and it got even hotter when more agents arrived a minute after the explosion. Thankfully, she quickly went over to explain to them what had happened, but not before she forced her number on me. Ito stayed near me. He looked worried over my bleeding arm, but I assured him it was fine. "Are you really going to call her?" he asked, his eyes directed to Cameron and the two agents carefully listening to her. She's cute. Maybe," I answered with a shrug. For some reason, Ito looked even more concerned. He took my good hand with his. "Do you have a death wish? Is this why you have this job? Whatever the problem is, we can talk about it," he offered. I didn't understand why he assumed such a thing. "What are you talking about?" I asked, but didn't take my hand back. I don't think he could blush. If he could, his cheeks would have been as red as mine were a few seconds ago. "Well, she's a succubus. A full-blooded one, it seems. If you slept with her, you'll die," he explained. I did a double take. Her being a succubus made sense. I've heard a little about them. There was a decent number of half-blooded ones, due to the fact of how often those types of creatures sleep around. Full-blooded ones were much rarer. If you went all the way with them, that was it. Almost every person who went that far became obsessed with them. They wouldn't eat or sleep. They did nothing but think of another chance to share a bed with those monsters. Succubi drained humans when they did the deed. It depended on the person, but most were fully drained after 3 meetings. Even knowing all of that, my brain still very much wanted to call Cameron later. "You're still thinking about it," Ito said, almost sounding disappointed. Sorry," I admitted. He got in front of me, trying to block the view of Cameron. "Call me instead," he offered. I took in his completely serious expression. I didn't think I had done anything that impressed him enough to make such a suggestion. I glanced at his missing arm. He was a weak agent, one that wouldn't last very long at this job. He would have never even tried to fight the monster that night. And yet, he was an honest person who cared about others. He instantly decided to offer himself up to save my life from Cameron. He was also incredibly cute. "I'll think about it," I said, smiling. "You better," he threatened with a nod. "Are you gonna be okay without an arm?" I pointed out. I hoped he wasn't in too much pain because of his injuries. "I can easily replace it," he half shrugged. That was a relief. We were called over to give reports about what had happened. It soon became clear that the monster I had exploded was what ate the 4 men. It could shift between forms, so after it ate its victims in the washrooms, it just walked out of the bar with a different face. It was interrupted before it could finish the last meal of the night. Ito found it in a bathroom. He saved a person, but lost an arm. I was told to get my cuts looked at by a clinic. I refused. I could treat them at home. Cheaper that way. We were let go for the night. Cameron clung to an agent, but she waved at me. I waved back, unable to help it. Supernatural creatures were able to handle succubi better than humans. I don't think an agent would die or become obsessed with her. She'd found a meal for the time being. I bet she followed me from the bar, hoping for this outcome. I asked Ito to contact me to tell me how he was doing. I wanted to know he was alright. I then went back to the bar to fulfill my promise to buy the homeless men dinner. They didn't question my bloody arm, which was nice. I got home tired as hell. I wrapped up my arm and crawled into bed. I wasn't able to sleep. My brain kept going back to the events that made me retire from contract work. The death of my partner weighed heavy on my chest. I'd avoided thinking about it for so long. When I finally did, it felt like my body was made of lead. My phone went off in the dark, from a text coming in. I reached over, wondering who it might be. I heard there was an explosion downtown. Are you still alive? I stared at the screen for a long time. Did August really care if I was dead or not? It was an odd feeling to have someone check up on me. Another text came through before I answered him. I was gonna buy Lucas a goldfish to teach him about death. But you'll do. I frowned. I don't know why I thought for a second he cared about me. He only cared about his adopted son. Which wasn't entirely a bad thing. Go buy a fish, I replied. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/JordanGroupHorror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow, and see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.